with that, we'll jump right in. We'll start with intros. Hello, everyone. My name is Rob Schutz. I started Snagged a couple of years ago, kind of by accident. I've come up through the startup space. I was an early employee at BarkBox, treats and toys for dogs, and then left. And I'm a co-founder of Row, the telehealth company out of New York, and was there for many years. And I stepped back from day to day a few years ago as I'm taking a bit of a breath from like the startup and VC world. But I've always had this weird love of domain names and getting them for myself and my companies and my friends' companies. And I would have investors reach out and I'd have, incubators reach out and they're like, how does this world work? And so it's been a really interesting, fascinating world to learn more about. And I've had the opportunity now to get a lot of reps on figuring out how to close these deals, how to price them, how to structure them, etc. And Brian and I I'll let him introduce himself, but Brian and I have really dove into the domain world. We were at a domain name conference in Vegas last month, which was just as wild as you can imagine. And we've kind of found this really interesting niche where we've become a conduit between, I would say, like the startup world and the founder world, and then this kind of opaque world of domain names and domain owners. So that's been really fun and really gratifying to help people find their names. Brian.
Yeah, my turn. All right. Brian Jarko, it's great to meet everyone. Prior to joining Rob in the Snag team, I was on the leadership team at ZocDoc, which is a health tech company out of New York, and have 20 plus years of enterprise sales experience. I've always been interested in and fascinated by the intersection of kind of working with people, doing deals, but also investing. And domains are really kind of they just sit at the center of all three of those. Maybe I wasn't the hardest sell for Rob, considering that we grew up together, known each other for 35 years, and we actually had a daily deal business
I
together.
just called your mom and told her you should come work on this, and she was great.
Yeah, that's true. I wasn't going to say anything. But when Rob asked me a year and a half ago to join him, having watched him kind of grow this organically from the ground up, it was really a no brainer to kind of get the band back together, so to speak, and wade into this wild world of domains with him. So anyway, it's great to meet everyone. Looking forward to a good conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brian. So maybe to set the stage here, really kind of been doing this for, I would say, 2-ish years with more gusto. We've had the opportunity to close a ton of deals. I think when we started making these slides in February, beginning of February, 725 deals in the last 2 years, including 467 last year. But what's been really interesting is getting to meet and talk with so many founders and investors, and the same sets of questions continue to come up around how to acquire names, how to value them, what are they worth, how to think about domain strategy, how to think about domains as part of picking a brand name. And so this is kind of our attempt to turn a lot of those answers into something a little bit more practical. So we'll walk you through like some of the data we collected across all of our different deals, as well as kind of just domain trends across the industry as a whole. And before we dive into like the full nitty gritty, I thought it would be fun to kind of just give a high level on the types of deals we get involved in. Like sometimes they're pretty routine, right? Like we are going after a certain name, we do a bunch of research, we get in touch with the owner, we try to negotiate a deal and get across the finish line. Sometimes they're very weird and complicated, including this one here. You can read the whole blog post on this, by the way, at snag.com/gold. But this is one where in November, Brian and I, after about a year of chasing this really rare oneword.com, we found this guy in the middle of Appalachia who owned the name, who was not very happy that I was reaching out to him. but we wound up negotiating a deal. He would only transact in gold and in person. So we had to get, 6 figures of gold coins. We drove down. We met this guy in a hotel conference room. We had off-duty cops and security that came with us, and we got it done. So sometimes these things are like easier, like something is for sale, or reach out to someone and we're able to negotiate a good price. Other times they're very complicated. We have some deal stories that are coming out over the next couple of weeks as well that are pretty wild. So just in case you were thinking this is all mundane, we're actually very cool. And these are some of the deals we. Okay, so to kick things off, very high level on domains and why domains are still kind of weird. Like coming from the startup space, it was very interesting to observe how much of the domain industry still acts like it is the 1990s. That's when a lot of people got these premium names and kind of snapped them up. But there, quite honestly, hasn't been a ton of innovation in the domain space, and that asymmetry of information is really like to the benefit of the owners. No one really knows who owns a lot of these, what their value is, what other comparable sales are. Um, so it's still a weird space. But in general, domains, right? They are these kind of one of a kind digital assets. If you really want Jeff.com, there's only one of them, right? But if you are able to acquire, the right name, and in many cases, our clients are going after oneword.com or sometimes AI names, it can be very powerful for your brand. The pricing on these is really subjective and irrational and a lot of times like emotional from the owners. It's so dependent on who owns it. Some people are, hey, thanks for reaching out, like I'd be willing to get something done if we can find a good price. Other people are like, how dare you contact me about my domain name? Like you will get this domain name when you pry it from my cold dead hands. And they're like, okay, thank you very much for your time. Maybe we'll come back to you if some things change. So much of this is its own journey every time we're going and trying to acquire one of these deals. But when it comes to pricing, even if someone is open to selling, we equate these to fine art. It's kind of like a fine art piece where there's no Kelly Blue Book on this name is worth this amount of money. It's if the lower range of the owner's acceptable price intersects with the upper range of the buyer's acceptable price. And if those intersect, that's when you can get deals done. But that doesn't always happen. And people aren't always swayed by here's what something else sold for, or this is, what the market says. If someone says, I think this is a $10 million domain name, and they aren't willing to be swayed, there's not much you can do about it other than move on or find a way to structure something that works. So I'll run through a few high levels, and then I know Brian's going to jump into more of like the sales data, so you can see more practical examples of what things are and types of names are selling at. But there are a lot of different top level domains, TLDs we call them. That's kind of after the dot, like .com, .org. It's called a TLD. And each of those kind of has their own little niche. .com is kind of like the OG and definitely the biggest and I would say most reputable TLD out there. A lot of folks might start on different TLDs and want to move to a .com over time. .org, generally for nonprofits. .ai, very popular now for AI native companies. .xyz has become a little more popular in the crypto space. New ones are popping up every day. Some doing well, some looking for traction. Like you could probably score a very good .horse domain right now if you really wanted to. And the last thing I'll say on domains, and then we can jump into some of the numbers here, but like some people really care about them. Some founders are like, it's really important. I'm doing TV ads. It's important for the brand, and I will spend a lot of money in order to get this locked down. Other founders don't care. And that's totally fine. Like my take on all this is a domain name usually isn't going to make or break a company, especially early on. But as you have traction, it can help accelerate like legitimacy and reputation, and that can translate and trickle down into improvements in business metrics, right? Conversion rate, maybe organic search, brand affinity and awareness, etc. So there's a lot of reasons why some folks think of them very highly, and reasons why others don't, and there's no right or wrong way to approach it. Take it away, Brian.
Cool. So let's take a look at some of the data points, and I think this will add just a little bit more emphasis to some of the points that Rob made earlier. But looking at 2025, and we're going to start with the TLDs and the breakdown of what we saw at Snagged, and then compare that with the industry. So across the year, the majority of the domains that were brokered by us, 61% were .coms. And so, I think in a lot of cases, people wanted the .com, were not interested in kind of anything else, and so we helped them get those. Next up was the .ai, 23%. What's funny about the .ai is if you go back a few years, I don't think it would have been this high. But just over the last few years, as most of you I know are acutely aware, .ai and AI generally has become so much more prevalent, and companies want to message and indicate that they are, an AI company, AI enabled. And so getting an AI domain is really important and really impactful. I'd also add that it has given organizations a fallback if they can't afford the .com. So if they want the .com but they can't afford it, it's not available, somebody else is using it. The .ai, if they are an AI company, if they're using AI, is a good kind of next option. Gives them time to continue to grow, to continue to capitalize, and then they can make another run at the .com when they're ready. And then across the other TLDs, kind of make up the rest, 16%. When you compare that to the broader market, the industry, our numbers are pretty much in line with what we're seeing elsewhere. So 60% .com, 24% .ai, and then you can see the breakdown of some of the other TLDs, .io, .co, .app. I think especially in the case of .co and .io, 5-10 years ago, those names were probably higher. I think .ai has started to kind of take over the role that those had in the market for companies. So let's look at kind of the year ahead, what we see coming. I think .coms will continue to be valuable, kind of the top of the mountain for most companies where they want to be. It's because they have credibility, because they have authority, and the other TLDs just can't compete with what the .com signals. AI, I think, is going to continue to boom, to grow. I think there are more AI companies launching every day. I also think some of the companies that have been around for a few years, they're starting to raise more money. They're starting to become more established. And as Rob mentioned before, they may want to kind of tighten up the brand and maybe looking for an upgrade to their domain. And so the AI could be a really great way to do
Yeah,
that.
and Brian, a lot of that on the AI side too is because of funding, right? Like you all know, if you're in this space, like a lot of AI companies are being funded right now, and so when people go and they want to make sure they're signaling their AI forward, getting like a really good one word AI domain is actually a pretty great way to do that, and is much cheaper than the .com alternative. So more of these companies come along and kind of giving the permission for AI to be a bigger player.
Yep, totally agree. Um, and then just the other TLDs, .io, .org, .xyz, they have their value. There are specific cases where those make a lot of sense for the companies, but there are trade-offs. Again, what those TLDs kind of message to the broader market, and so that's just something to keep in mind on those. Anything else? Oh, okay. So let's talk about. So that was the
Slide.
TLDs
I'm not going. Just say slide.
slide. Next. Um, so that's kind of what we're seeing on the TLD side. Let's talk about the domain themselves, the names themselves. Um, the most of the premium domains are going to be one word dictionary names. Even when we look at the names we brokered over the last year or so, majority of those started with someone wanting a one word dictionary name, and maybe it just wasn't available for them. It wasn't, the price wasn't right. It was already in use, and so they had to kind of pivot to something different. But the demand for one word dictionary names is high, and it's where most people want to be. When we look at our data across 2025, just a few data points that I think are interesting and kind of emphasize this. 69% of the names we brokered were under 8 characters, so short, just a few syllables, usually punchy names. And then 63% were one word. So again, kind of emphasizing what we're seeing across the industry, which is those premium domains tend to be one word dictionary names. Some kind of recent examples that I think are just interesting to call out. Chat.com sold for 15.5 million. Rocket.com 14, Slash, which we were involved in, 1 million, and then Cloud AI 600,000. And I'm sure for those who watched the Super Bowl, you saw the ad for AI.com that sold just a week or so prior to the Super Bowl for 70 million. I think you look at these names, you think about AI.com, the discrepancy between just the .com names we're talking about is so wide. And this is really because it depends on, as Rob was talking about earlier, the owner and their expectations for the name, how that's currently being used. Are they open to selling? Do they have a plan for it that you kind of have to pay to change their plan? There's a lot of things that go into why these prices are so different. And so,
Yeah, it's
I think in the
it's
next slide,
the owner for sure, but also the buyer and how badly they want the name, right? Like you take a
right,
Rocket.com, Rocket Mortgage really wanted that name, and the owner had high expectations, and so they wound up just having to pay more. We put Slash here because Slash is, while still a big sale, 15x smaller than Rocket.com. So each of these is really tough, and it's their own journey because the comps are all over the board. It is so dependent on the owner and the buyer, and if they can actually find alignment. And in fact, you know, a good example is I had a client the end of 2024. We bought agentic.com for $20,000, which, if you're going to try and buy that right now, that's probably a 5 million plus dollar name. So it's so dependent on timing and the owner and their willingness to sell. And you can find deals occasionally. They are fewer and further between, but they do exist and they're out there.
so those examples that we just shared, we definitely don't want you necessarily to anchor on those amounts, because yes, there will be names that are going to be at those levels in order to acquire them, but there's a lot of deals that happen for .com and .ai names well below those levels, and we've kind of seen that play out in our data. So the average .com price for names we brokered in 2025, 166,000. The average AI price, 69,000. And the range of names that we brokered is pretty wide. $59 for a name that essentially expired, and we were able to pick it up on drop catch. All the way up to a $2.75 million name that we helped acquire. So there's a wide range. I think the key here is that these averages are helpful, but they're also skewed, right? These deals like the $2.75 million deal are really going to skew the average, and so there were some big ones that are going to pull that average up, but there were a lot of small ones too. I think that goes both for the .coms and the .ai. So key takeaway here: not all premium .com names are going to be seven figures, and not all premium .ai names are going to be mid to high six figures. I think you can still get deals, and you can get great domains under these averages, for sure. It's just those, especially getting really, really cheap domains, really great deals, five figures for .coms. Um, they happen, but they happen very few and far between, and it's really hard to kind of go in with that expectation. But I also think that people can get scared off from some of the big deals that you read about. I think there's a lot that happens in between.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much, Brian. Appreciate your insights as always. Um, so we've talked a lot about how price is so dependent on the parties involved, right? And the owners playing such a big part in that. So I thought it'd be helpful to break down like who are some of these owners, what are the different buckets we kind of put them into, and why does that matter when it comes to pricing and availability and honestly negotiation strategy as well. So the first bucket I would say is domain investors. There is a small but very active community of domain investors, and an even smaller and active community of really premium domain investors that are buying and selling very premium names. So, it's interesting. There's probably a group of, I don't know, 20 or 30 people that control the vast majority of, premium domain inventory across the internet. Um, and Brian and I have gotten to know some of them over the course of the last year or two. Their motivation to sell is ROI. They are ruthless about I'm going to buy it for as cheap as possible, and I'm going to try to sell that for 8 to 15x, and it's arbitrage. So domain investors, pricing can be higher to acquire from them, but they generally are more rational when it comes to negotiation. It's less of an emotional negotiation that it is just around the numbers. Then you also have corporations and big companies that's like where we say a lot of good domains go to die because some of these big companies, they've acquired lots of other companies and those companies have acquired lots of other companies. So they have this huge portfolio of great names that they're never going to use, but they're so big that they're not really motivated by $50,000 or $100,000. And so it can be a lot of work to dig them out and to actually get those into our clients' hands, but it's doable. It can just be a slug. You also have founders. I would imagine a lot of folks on the line own domain names, and probably some good ones. From previous companies, from business ideas, etc. Those folks, if it is an old business of theirs, a lot of times they'll have a pretty deep emotional connection to it. They are gettable, but again, the numbers have to be aggressive enough for them to feel comfortable selling. Then you've got mom and pop. We've done a lot of these deals where maybe it's a couple or a single owner, but they're not terribly technically sophisticated. They kind of wound up with this asset. Maybe they have a basic website on it. They have some emotional connection to it, but if the offers are good, they will sell. A lot of times they're the ones you need to walk through, like how we're going to migrate your Squarespace page and how we're going to move your email. And Brian and I get to spend a lot of time with those folks, walking them through how to do some of that. So we get to play technical support, which is fun. And then we have the old timers that I kind of like mentioned before, but those are like the people that got this name. Sometimes it's their first name or last name, or just the name of their company, and they got it in the 90s. And there is so much emotional connection to this name that it is very difficult to pry it loose without an extremely aggressive offer. It's just it becomes part of who they are. We have several of these have been working for years where we can't get in touch with the owner. They won't respond. Their kids won't respond. Their spouses, their friends at work, they just do not want to even talk about selling a name regardless of price. So that can be frustrating. But our philosophy is with patience and persistence, and usually a whole bunch of money doesn't hurt. You can pry some of these loose. Um, Wanted to talk a little bit about this, about like when it actually matters to get to get a premium domain name. Like I think about my experience a lot. When we started Row, it was initially Roman. We were focused on men's health, or actually erectile dysfunction was our first product. Um, and I mean, I wanted to get Roman.com, obviously. Talked to the man a bunch who owned it. It's very expensive. We kind of just decided like, let's roll with something that's good enough, while we're figuring out, do we have a business and does this make sense? So we were on getroman.com for the first 3 or 4 years. And that was totally fine. I think sometimes folks will think, hey, getting this name as I launch or right after I launch is going to help me find product market fit, or like help drive people to me. Very rarely is that the case. It's usually like you either have a business or you don't. The domain name isn't going to usually push you over the edge with that. And then as you grow and you get the opportunity to, earn, raise more capital and bring on more customers, et cetera, you kind of earn the right to go spend a little bit more money and upgrade. But I'm a big fan of like good enough to start, and then once you have traction, you move to the next step of like thinking about a more premium name. And we've actually seen a lot of this too, where companies, especially younger YC people that are just getting started, they'll come to us and they'll want help naming the company, but they're very domain first with these naming exercises. They're open to a lot of different um, types of names, but they want to make sure they get a really solid .com or .ai domain to start, and then based on that, they can kind of figure out what makes sense for their business, etc. So that's been, I would say, newer, where people are coming in with that mentality. They want to make sure they're getting something great on the domain side, and they can kind of back into the story around why is this their name, as long as it's tangentially related to their business.
So, um, oh, Rob, I think this is you still.
Oh, I just went right through it. I just went right through it. Why do we even practice for hours and hours? Yeah, so this is more just recapping, starting with domain first.
So, in terms of where you can go to find domains, there's really kind of two main kind of avenues people take. There are others. I mean, there are other ways you could find domains, but these are two of the more kind of common ways. The first is leveraging marketplaces like Atom, Brand Bucket, or Snags Marketplace, which I'll go into a little bit deeper detail here in a second. But these can be really helpful from a discovery standpoint, from an education standpoint, figuring out how names are priced, what names kind of jump out at you, which ones you like. And so I think a lot of the founders that we talk to, they've kind of perused these different marketplaces to just get a lay of the land, see what's available, and figure out what kind of names really jump out at them and what they're really looking for. Um, that said, the majority of kind of premium names, as Rob was talking about earlier, they're not going to be on these marketplaces. They're owned by individuals. Sometimes they're domain investors. Sometimes they're this guy that bought 3 domains in 1995 and is holding them close and refuses to sell. But typically the other way that people find these domains is they work with brokers like us. There's a number of different brokers that are out there that we work closely with as well. But they can be really helpful in finding these names, identifying the owner, engaging them. But the other part of this is like, how do you get the best price, right? How do you get the best price for a name? How can you work the seller down to kind of get to your the amount that makes sense for you? And so, marketplaces are a little bit harder to get that, but brokers can be much more helpful in kind of figuring out the different levers to pull to get you kind of the best price once they've helped you identify the name and the owner and whatnot. And then in terms of where to sell domains, obviously those marketplaces are great as well. You can also use brokers. We actually, funny enough, we did not think we were going to have kind of a sell side of our business, have a marketplace where people could buy domains. But as we were helping folks find and acquire great names, they also had names that they didn't want anymore, and they wanted to sell. And so we just had more and more clients asking us to help them sell names. And so Rob and I just kind of decided it really just makes sense for us to stand up a marketplace, a place that our clients can show their names. We can generate interest. We have names that we own that are also on there. And so we think it's a pretty good curated group of names that are really kind of geared towards founders and startups. And so, just a quick plug since we're here. If you have a domain that you are interested in selling, please reach out and we'll help give you a sense of what we think the value is and go from there.
But the caveat is it has to be a good name.
Oh,
So
right.
no shitty names. That's just a rule that we have. No, we've actually been. It's been interesting. Again, we weren't planning on launching this area of the business, but because we're part of so many deals, we're seeing so many names. It felt right to take on ones that are more premium and see if we can be helpful, whether it's for our clients or for other folks just coming in. But we've been much more explicit now about only choosing more premium names versus putting everything out there. It's not meant to be the everything store. Um, so that's kind of a good transition, almost like we planned it, on like how Snag works and how we work with founders. Like I mentioned, we do a lot of different types of work. Sometimes it's naming, where we'll have a lot of companies come from YC or incubators that are open to the idea of lots of different names, but they want to get a great domain. So we've had the pleasure of probably naming a dozen plus companies last year, and it's super fun seeing those come to light. Um, we'll also a lot of times help negotiate deals. Like sometimes a name is for sale on GoDaddy for $100,000, right? We'll get brought in because we've gotten so many reps at negotiating. We're we're very good at getting best possible prices. So sometimes we'll just get brought in, and you build incentives so everyone's incentivized to get the best price possible. Other times, and I would say a majority of our work thus far has been like being domain hunters. So someone comes, they really want this very specific name, and they don't know how to get in touch. They have money, they really want this name, they don't even know how to make offers to. So a lot of time and energy is spent on research and outreach and trial and error, and sometimes getting the phone, slammed in our ear, reaching out to folks. But it just takes energy and persistence, and eventually you kind of cross a lot of different people off, and hopefully figure out the right folks to talk to. And then lastly, we get brought in a lot of times for rebrands. If someone's going through legal challenges or trademark issues, or for whatever reason they need to rebrand, we'll get brought in to help with that process from both a naming and domain perspective, which is always very fun. Um, and and that is what we prepared today. So I know that unless you have anything else you want to add, that's super pressing, Brian.
No, I want to answer some questions.
Yeah, let's answer some questions. So a few have already been submitted. We got a few that were sent in ahead of time as well. Um, but if you have questions, feel free to throw them in Q&A right now, and we can make sure that we're addressing those as well. Let's see. Oh, this is like I think this is a fun way to do it. All right, from Sean. Is it true that if we search for a domain in GoDaddy, they'll jack up the price if we search the following day? It's a good question from Sean. Thank you. Um, I think realistically, I've heard less of that on a name that's for sale. The reality is, if you go to GoDaddy or an equivalent and you see a name that's for sale for whatever, $25,000, that price is being set by the owner, right? The owner has a dashboard. They have the ability to see if someone is revisiting the site every day and coming back, or if the same IP address keeps hitting it. And some owners are like really savvy and sneaky, and they might say, "Oh, this is getting a lot of traffic. I'm gonna raise the price and see if I can make some more money. Sometimes folks will do that. It's really on like a per owner basis. I would say less like the registrar is playing games. Um, what I've heard more, which to has been mostly debunked, is people will say, "Oh, I went and I tried to register like robissupercool.com, or I tried to register robissupercool.com, and then it was available, and then the next day I went and someone had registered it. Like GoDaddy is front running. Um, I've heard that a few times. I haven't experienced it myself. I don't have too many clients who've experienced it. GoDaddy and all the registrars will swear up and down this is not what they do, and it's probably not like an amazing money making opportunity for them. But I've definitely heard it come up, and that's why, especially if something is for sale for like $10, if you're interested in it, I always say just snap it up because you never know. Someone else could also be interested, and the last thing you want is now that name is gone forever. So it's a great question. I think uh, I appreciate you asking there, Sean.
Rob, the one thing I would add is this is not the exact same, but kind of tangentially, you can work with most registrars. Registrars have brokers that work within them, and you can work with them to make offers on names that are listed. There are cases where if you make an offer that is low, an owner can decide to jack up the price.
Yeah.
You know, uh, because they know you really want it, and now they're just trying to kind of squeeze you for more. So
Or
that is
sometimes it's
just
less nefarious though. Like we've seen this a bunch of times where if I'm a domain investor and I have like 5,000 domains, I don't know exactly what I've listed each of my domains at. And maybe there's a name out there that's listed for $5,000. And then someone comes in and they make an offer of $1,000. And I, as an owner, get that message. And then I look at the listing. I'm like, $5,000. I should have updated this. That was from 5 years ago. This should be a $25,000 name. And so they'll actually get your really low ball offer reminded them that they need to update their pricing. So that's why we also give advice if a name is like relatively cheap, if it's a couple $1,000s, I generally people will come to us and I'll say, don't even get us involved, just buy it. Like just hit the buy button because you don't want to get in a scenario where you reminded them that the price is too low. And if you're like trying to be too cute and negotiate over like $100 here and there, that rarely is going to go well for you. So usually, if something is reasonably priced, we say you should just buy it instead of trying to squeeze too much. Let's see this other one here from Hunter. Have you ever forcefully acquired a domain that would fall under a trademark owner owned by the acquirer? Yeah, Brian's our enforcer, so he'll usually knock on doors and bring these back to the rightful owners. We have been involved, not directly, but I would say secondarily on a couple of these. There's a process called UDRP, where it doesn't go through the courts. It's kind of an arbitration process where if a domain name, if a trademark holder feels like a domain name has been acquired and is being used in bad faith or a variety of other reasons, they can file a UDRP. I don't remember, $500 or $1,000. It goes to this arbitration panel where both sides can kind of defend themselves. So it definitely happens. I think in a lot of cases when you have more generic terms, or you have domains that were registered in the 90s, the precedent is really there that if a domain name was registered before the trademark, and the domain name isn't being used in bad faith, like it isn't pretending to impersonate the trademark holder, it can be hard to pry those away. It's doable, but the UDRP process in place for exactly that. All right, we have another one here from Isaac. Let's see. How does your fee structure work? Fixed, retainer, or success fee? It's a good question. There's no generic answer. I'll give you an answer, but there's no like one size fits all. Like again, sometimes people will come to us and they'll say this name is listed for 50K. Can we get it for less? In that case, we're not charging fees, usually we will just honestly, usually we'll split the difference of the cost savings as our commission because we're pretty confident we can get people the best deals. Other times, if it's like a domain name that's actively for sale and we know the owners, we won't usually charge a retainer on that. We'll just work on success and try to negotiate the best deal possible. And then I would say for those other types of deals where it requires a lot of deep research and kind of going down the rabbit hole, we will charge a small upfront retainer, but the majority of the commission is based on success. So we're going to go deep. That could be a couple days, it could be a couple months, it could be a couple years. I've had several deals that have taken 2+ years. We'll charge a small retainer that covers the research. We've kind of built out a research team that can attack some of this. But then the vast majority is just going to be on, did we get you the name at a price you're excited about?
Rob, I think it'd be worth also just sharing how we think about the more consulting or naming projects, how those work.
Sure, sure. We can jump into that. Sarah chiming in with a great question here. So I'm not ignoring you, Brian, but we'll come back to you. So
I'll
Sarah's
answer
asking,
Sarah's question first.
avoiding searches. Do you ever share opportunistic names that come up, like an insider digest? Ooh, that's a great call, Sarah. We've actually talked about that because we do wind up getting in the middle of all of these very good deals. Like we have a couple right now. Center.com is a good one. Flare, FLARE.com is a good one. Lux, LUXE.com is a good one where we've just gotten introduced to folks who are interested in selling and they're very well priced. And so we have talked about making like a distribution list. Maybe that's something we should more formally put together. But usually we'll throw those up on the site. We'll do posts on social, and then it'll be part of the monthly newsletter. But I love the idea of like a quick hit. This one's available if somebody wants to come make an offer. That's a great push. Brian, what was your amazing question again?
I was just saying, piggybacking on Isaac's question around our fee structure, just going into the other way that we work with people around the naming engagements, the consulting engagements, where it's not about a name, but it's more about kind of helping someone figure out what that name is and then going to get it.
Yeah. No, we do a lot of that where people kind of come to us with their criteria, right? The budget being one of those main points, right? Are we looking to spend 10K? Are we able to spend 100K? That just lets us know what range of names we can kind of bring to folks. Other criteria will be things like how many words, is it okay to do a prefix or a suffix? Is it okay to use alternate TLDs? What names do you like right now? What brands do you see out there where you really like their domain? We'll try and use that. We'll use all of that as inputs to come up with usually a batch of between 20 and 40 initial names to get feedback on. And it's such a subjective process that we're really dependent on feedback from the client to help us calibrate because we might think a name is awesome and you might say, oh, that was my ex-boyfriend's name or last name, so like we will never use that. It's like, great, I did not know that. So it's usually a bit of back and forth and you kind of narrow down on a handful and then go after, start to get pricing, etc. To give clients as much input as they can have going into the decision making process. But those could be quick. We had a couple that were like first batch. People fell in love with names, and we just went and negotiated deals. Those can also be long and excruciating if a client doesn't really have a firm opinion. We'll kind of have to sometimes nudge them in direction and see if they like a name or not. But it's generally a pretty good, fun, collaborative process. From Isaac, let's see. How legit are listings sites like Spaceship? Is there downside to putting an offer and seeing how they respond? Word will alert the owner or interest name. Um, yeah, so good question. Spaceship is legit, fully legit. It's actually from the same folks that created and run Namecheap. It's kind of like their new iteration. So we work closely with the Namecheap team. We work closely with the Spaceship team. Um, and yeah, is it worth putting in offers? I mean, in general, yes. I think it's if there's an ability to put in an offer, I always think that it's smart to do so. Um, the challenge is finding a number that is not so low that you will not get a response and they will not take you seriously, but a number that also leaves you some wiggle room to come up when they inevitably say no to the first one. So a lot of times that's a good example of when people will come to us. Like we've done tons of deals on names that are listed on Spaceship where people say like, just help me negotiate this. Like let's just make sure we're getting best deal possible. I don't want them to know who I am. I want my name being and like who I am and amount of money I've raised or what I'm building to be confidential. And so a lot of times we'll play that role where we just say we have a client, we're looking at a bunch of different names. This is one of them. And try not to tip hands too much. But I would say in general, if these are good names, they're probably getting lots of offers. So you are not like tipping your hand too much if you put in a reasonable offer or a reasonable starting offer. I would say it's more about, do you want to make sure you stay confidential because you're worried that they will figure out who you are and then jack up the price? I mean, that's like not an unreasonable worry. But I think less, you know, showing interest in the name is going to cause them to jack the price up. Usually, if they have those lenders, they want to sell the name. So it's more about just making sure you're getting best price possible.